December has a particular atmosphere in the United Kingdom. The days are short, the light fades fast, and there is a collective quiet understanding that the year is winding toward its end. Schools prepare to close. Offices slow down. People make plans to spend time with the people they love most. For most people, Christmas 2015 carried that same familiar rhythm. For Katie Locke Kai Shay's family, it became the moment everything stopped. Katie Locke was 23 years old and already living the kind of life that takes most people years longer to build. She taught history and politics at Cardinal Pole Catholic School in Hackney, East London, a demanding role in a high-pressure environment that she had thrown herself into completely. Teaching is not a job that stays in the classroom. It follows you home in marked papers and lesson plans and mental checklists that run through the evening. Katie understood that and accepted it without complaint. She loved her work. She loved her students. And on the rare occasions when the workload eased and she had real time to herself, she found her way back to sport. She had been that way since childhood, active, outgoing, always looking for ways to be useful to the people around her. Her father would later recall a story from her nursery years, the kind of small detail that tells you everything you need to know about a person. When asked what she had done at playtime, the young Katie explained that she had not gone out to play. She had been too busy helping the other children put their shoes on. She was that kind of child, and she grew into that kind of adult. By the time she was a teenager, she had developed into someone her family and friends described as self-confident, fearless, energetic, and deeply kind. She joined the Brownies and the Girl Guides and took up water sports, eventually becoming a qualified kayak instructor. She studied history and politics at the University of Southampton. She volunteered at the 2012 London Olympics. She spent time working with underprivileged children in the United States. Whatever she set her mind to, she completed. There was no half measure with Katie. She was the youngest of 3 daughters, still living at home with her parents, building the early foundations of what everyone around her fully expected would be a long and meaningful career. Like millions of people her age across the country, she had been using online dating as a way to meet new people. The platform was Plenty of Fish. In early December 2015, she came across a profile belonging to a man named Carl Langdell. Their early conversations seemed positive. He presented well, spirited well. His LinkedIn profile listed a law degree and suggested he had founded his own law firm. He also maintained a blog called Ordinary Decent Human, focused on humanitarian concerns. On the surface, he appeared to be an educated, engaged, and socially conscious young man. Katie was sensible about it. She kept her friends informed as her plans developed. She shared a photo of Carl with them. She told them where they were going and what the arrangements were. She was taking the kind of reasonable precautions that feel almost routine when you're dating someone new. She could not have known what was underneath the profile she had been reading. They met on the evening of December 23rd at the Traffic Bar in Shoreditch, East London. Early in the night, Katie sent a message to a friend to say the date was going well. But as the hours passed, Carl began drinking heavily, reaching a state that could only be described as extreme intoxication. Faced with someone who could barely stand, Katie made a decision that tells you a great deal about who she was. Out of concern for his well-being, she arranged to get him back safely. She paid £65 for the taxi. She paid an additional £80 for a cleanup fee after he was violently ill during the journey. They arrived at the Theobald's Park Hotel in Hertfordshire and checked in at 3:30 in the morning of December 24th. A member of the hotel's reception staff noted that as they walked along the corridor, Katie was physically supporting Carl because he was staggering and unsteady. She had gone out of her way to take care of a man she had met for the first time that evening. Christmas Eve morning arrived with its usual quiet anticipation. Hotels filling up, families gathering, a sense of warmth and familiarity spreading across the country. And then Katie went silent. Because Katie had shared Carl's photograph before the date, her friends were able to trace him on social media. They sent a message on Facebook asking where she was. He replied with confusion, claiming she had taken a taxi and left hours ago, that her phone battery had died before she went, that he had no idea where she might be. He signed off asking to be kept updated. He was performing concern for a woman he had already killed. His friends did not stop. They found his address, the family home in Hertfordshire where he lived with his parents. Katie's father drove out there. Carl's mother said her son had taken the dog for a walk. She called him. When he answered, Carl told his mother, I am a monster. I put her in the ground. Katie's father contacted the emergency services. Carl was located and arrested at Lee Valley Park. He told an officer where he had left the body. The hotel grounds were searched, and Katie Locke was found in undergrowth near a skip on the property, her body carrying multiple injuries consistent with a prolonged and violent attack. The pathologist described what had been done to her as forceful and sustained, accompanied by serious sexual violence. She had been strangled to death, and the depravity did not end there. After murdering her, Carl had taken photographs of her body on his phone, images he later attempted to delete. He had called reception to request a late checkout. He placed a do not disturb sign on the door. He wrapped her body in the room's quilt, placed it in a laundry cart, and wheeled her out of the hotel, leaving her near the skip outside. He had wedged a coat hanger into a fire escape door on the floor, a detail a separate hotel guest noticed and found deeply strange. Then he went back to his room and slept. In the morning, he went down for breakfast, checked out of the hotel, and left. The bedding and all the towels from the room were gone. The window lock had been broken. After leaving the hotel, Carl called a woman he had been seeing through Tinder for a couple of months. Someone he had actually taken to the same hotel on a previous occasion. He told her he had killed someone. He did not explain why. He told her he would be going to prison for a long time. And then, during the investigation, he sat through a formal interview on Christmas Day in complete silence, answering nothing, offering nothing, leaving the people trying to understand what had happened to Katie with no cooperation at all. The question many people would be asking at this point, and it is a question worth sitting with, is how a man like Carl Langdell was free to be on a dating app meeting women in December 2015 at all, because this was not someone whose history was unknown. The picture that emerged was one of a man who had been circling the edges of catastrophe for years, documented by multiple agencies, assessed by professionals, flagged repeatedly, and still somehow left entirely free to move through the world without restriction. So, Carl had a long and detailed history with both mental health services and law enforcement. He had been diagnosed with emotionally unstable personality disorder, carrying narcissistic and antisocial traits. In 2009, he received a formal caution for assaulting his girlfriend. By 2013, he had been classified as a risk to himself. In February 2015, less than a year before Katie's death, Carl was living in Bristol. In March of that year, he made a call to a community psychiatric nurse. During that call, he described wanting to cut the throat of his girlfriend's sister, to remove her clothing, and to abuse her body. The nurse assessed the threat as credible. When Carl learned his words had been passed on, he made a second call to the same service and threatened to slit the nurse's throat. He then called the emergency services from outside his girlfriend's home and threatened to kill someone. He was arrested and held under the Mental Health Act. During the assessment that followed, Carl told the examining doctor that he experienced sexual gratification from thoughts of killing people. He said he had been having those thoughts since the age of 16 and that they were becoming more intense over time. The doctor assessed him as presenting a high risk to others. The doctor stated clearly that Carl posed a danger to women. A detailed letter was sent to his GP, but that letter was not shared with any public bodies in Hertfordshire. He was ultimately not detained under the Mental Health Act following that assessment. Instead, he was remanded into custody at Bristol Prison. On April 15th at Bristol Crown Court, he pleaded guilty to making threats to kill. Sentencing was postponed and he was granted bail, with conditions that included wearing an electronic tag and residing at his parents' home in Hertfordshire. Carl submitted a written statement in which he acknowledged that no apology, no sentence, and not even his own death could make up for what he had taken. It was a sentence that confirmed he understood exactly what he had done and chose to frame it in the language of regret, without ever offering the one thing that would have mattered most, the truth. The inquest into Katie's death, requested by her family, became the process through which the failures of multiple agencies were formally examined. The assistant coroner for Hertfordshire, Alison McCormack, conducted the inquiry. The findings were significant. Several opportunities to share information between public bodies about Carl had been missed. There had been minimal coordination and no unified approach to managing him. No single organization held the complete picture of who he was and what he had expressed. The concern for protecting female patients and staff had not been extended to protecting women in the wider community once he was released. No agency had ever considered referring him to a potentially dangerous person's procedure, a mechanism designed specifically for situations like his, and one that could have placed additional restrictions around him. When he met Katie, he was in contact with up to 20 women through various platforms. An independent review concluded that there had been systemic missed opportunities across multiple organizations involved in Carl's management. It also offered a finding that stops some people and troubles others. It stated that there was no way for any individual agency to determine whether he was among the vast majority of people who make threats, but never act, or the small percentage who do. The review concluded that Katie's death could not have been predicted with enough certainty to have been prevented. There are people who read that conclusion and find it reasonable. There are others who read it and think about the doctor who wrote in detail that Carl posed a danger to women, about the nurse who assessed his threats as credible, about the staff who moved him to an all-male ward, about the explicit statement he made demanding to be documented as someone who would kill when released. And they struggle to reconcile all of that with a conclusion about certainty. Both views deserve space. What is not in question is that every person in every system that touched Carl Langdell's case walked away knowing something. No one ever put it all on one table. On February 11th, 2021, at 5 minutes past midnight, Carl Langdell was found in his locked single-occupancy cell with a self-inflicted wound to his neck. He went into cardiac arrest. He was taken to Pinderfields Hospital and was pronounced dead at 1:47 in the morning. Katie Locke was a daughter, a friend, and a teacher. She was the young woman who stayed inside at nursery to help other children with their shoes. She was the kayak instructor, the Olympic volunteer, the history teacher who stayed late. She had studied and worked and built something and was still in the early stages of what she would eventually become. The years she did not get to live are not a detail at the edges of this story. They are the center of it. Her family's hope, articulated through the inquest and everything they chose to say publicly, was that her story would mean something beyond the tragedy itself. That the questions it raised about safeguarding, about information sharing, about the spaces that exist between agencies where dangerous people can move unseen, would be taken seriously by the systems responsible for answering them. Whether that hope has been fully honored is something only time and the cases that follow can answer. The police force in Avon and Somerset did not notify their counterparts in Hertfordshire that he had been bailed to their area. What followed was a period in which NHS staff in Hertfordshire were dealing with Carl at a local hospital. There were reports of him starting fires on the premises. There was an incident of alleged sexual contact with a vulnerable female patient who lacked the capacity to consent. Despite documented plans that stated these matters would be referred and investigated, the safeguarding process focused on the position of the vulnerable woman rather than examining Carl's behavior or the ongoing risk he represented to other women. By August 2015, a recommendation was made to detain him under the Mental Health Act. He was moved to an all-male ward specifically to protect vulnerable female patients from him. On September 17th of that year, he made his fourth documented threat to kill. He shouted at a staff nurse that when he left or was discharged, he would kill someone. He told the nurse to document it. He said it again. Hospital staff did pass this along to the local police. It was not formally recorded as a crime. On September 20th, 2015, Carl Langdell was discharged from the psychiatric hospital. On December 2nd, 2015, he appeared at Bristol Crown Court for sentencing. He had pleaded guilty to 2 counts of making threats to kill. He received a 9-month prison sentence, suspended for 2 years, alongside a 12-month mental health treatment requirement. He walked out of that courtroom a free man. Shortly after, he visited his GP and attempted to persuade her to prescribe 2 months' worth of medication at once. She declined and issued only a single month's supply, citing his history. It was a small act of caution and an otherwise deeply inadequate response to what the documents showed about who he was. 12 days after that sentencing, he met Katie Locke for the first time. At the time he was messaging her on Plenty of Fish, Carl Langdell was known to 2 separate police forces, 2 NHS mental health trusts, and the National Probation Service. All of them held pieces of information relevant to the risk he posed to women. None of them held the full picture. And critically, none of them knew what the others knew about him. No agency had ever brought those pieces together and acted on the combined weight of what they revealed. On Christmas Day 2015, Carl Langdell was charged with the murder of Katie Locke and remanded in custody. His violence did not stop with his imprisonment. While held on remand at HMP Bedford in May, he attacked a prison officer in what was described as a brutal and sustained assault. The officer had refused to unlock a cell so Carl could smoke. Carl charged at him, fractured his eye socket, threw him against the wall, and strangled him. The officer survived. It would be 8 years before he received compensation for what was done to him. Carl entered his formal plea via video link from Bedford Prison. He pleaded guilty to murder. But the proceedings were not finished. There were no answers from his interviews, no cooperation, and a full account of what had happened to Katie in that hotel room needed to be established before the court. What emerged when it was put on the record was the final deliberate cruelty of his position. His defense raised a claim that Katie had initiated a sexual encounter and consented to what took place. The forensic psychiatrist who examined Carl, Dr. Philip Joseph, addressed this directly and with precision. He described Carl as emotionally unstable, narcissistic, cold, and callous. He said Carl derived sexual gratification from controlling women and that the killing was likely sexually motivated. The claim being raised by the defense was the kind that tends to surface in cases involving dangerous men and the women they hurt. It deserved no more weight than the evidence assigned to it. In June 2016, Carl Langdell was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 26 years. The judge observed that the abuse of Katie's body after her death added a further dimension of depravity to the crime. The judge also noted that Carl had described himself to others as a monster and a psychopath, and stated directly that he considered Carl to pose a very great danger to women and girls with whom he might come into contact in the future. In the courtroom that day, Katie's family spoke. Her mother, Jennifer, said that nothing could have prepared her for being in the same room as him. She said she would miss her daughter every single day. Katie's father looked at Carl and said that on the internet, Carl had described himself as an ordinary, decent person. He was ordinary, her father said, but he was not decent.